Welcome back to the Assertive podcast. I'm Erica.
I'm Jess.
And we are licensed professional counselors in Texas, reviewing Am I the Asshole Reddit threads to help you learn skills for communication, healthy boundary setting, and assertive interpersonal functioning. Today, we are going to be looking at the difference between loose and assertive boundaries. We're going to be doing this with a post titled, Am I the Asshole for Forcing My Daughter to Remove the Do Not Disturb feature from her phone? My 16-year-old daughter has her phone on Do Not Disturb all the time. At first, it wasn't an issue since she would still answer my texts and calls whenever she is out of practice. For the past few weeks, she has stopped answering my texts and calls, and she says she hasn't received them when I ask her why she wasn't answering. I am not stupid. Her phone is on Do Not Disturb, and none of my texts or calls are going through. I'd ask my other daughter to see if they can reach out to her whenever she is out just to ask her what time she might be home. They get no response. My oldest, who is 22, tries to call, text, FaceTime, you name it, in order to obtain this information. Over the weekend, my daughter had to attend an event at school, and when I came to pick her up, she went MIA and wasn't answering any of my texts or calls since, again, the Do Not Disturb feature was on. I started to get frustrated over it, so when my daughter finally entered the car, I told her she needs to start answering my calls and texts, and she has no reason to ignore me when she knows I'm picking her up. My daughter gave me the excuse of, "Oh, I didn't see it," again. My frustration turned to anger, and I started yelling at her, saying, "None of us are able to easily get a hold of you. Something that normally takes 2 minutes takes 20 or more, since we can't seem to get you to answer the phone. Your father and I have been worried sick whenever you don't answer the phone." I then told her she has two choices. She can either remove the Do Not Disturb feature on her phone, or her phone gets taken away for a week. My daughter rolls her eyes and says it's not fair for her not to be allowed to have the Do Not Disturb feature. I said, "You need to start answering your phone then, or at the very least, call us back." I said that if she doesn't comply, her phone will be taken away. She begged me not to take her phone, so I said, "You need to remove the Do Not Disturb feature." She refused once again. When we got home, I told her that if she doesn't want her phone taken away, she needs to remove the Do Not Disturb feature. After some back and forth, my daughter removes the feature right in front of me before running to her room in tears. Now, before anyone thinks otherwise, I do allow her to have the phone on Do Not Disturb as long as she answers calls and text. We have to call her more than once to get a hold of her, but she is completely unreachable. I think I was too harsh, but I was at my wit's end. Am I the asshole? She also gives us some edits that I think are important to note, so I'm going to go through those. Some of you are thinking I'm spamming my daughter with phone calls and texts while she's at school. I do not message her during school hours. The issue is taking place after school or on the weekends. My daughter most of the time does not tell anyone where she's going, doesn't ask for permission when she wants to go out with friends, and sneaks out of the house anytime her father and I are gone. None of my other children have any knowledge of where she is, and if they'd ask her, she wouldn't answer. Sometimes my son will ask her if she could bring him something from McDonald's or if they can go to Target together. We did speak to her before, and she said she can keep her phone on Do Not Disturb, and we would never call her or text while she is in class. My daughter has also been lying to us about where she's going. She's asked to borrow the car to go get food, but would come home 2 hours later. I call her after 45 minutes, but the phone would go straight to voicemail. She normally does tell us if she's going to class or practice, but whenever she goes outside of those places, she doesn't tell us. And she won't answer the phone. It's like she's hiding. Some are suggesting I take car keys away. The problem with that is, if there's a car available, she will leave. She's taken my oldest daughter's car a few times, and when my oldest daughter would ask her where she's going, she would say, "None of your business." My oldest tried hiding the car keys from her, and it was met with manipulation and my daughter crying and screaming. Last thing she adds is, my daughter takes the car when my husband and I are not there, and if there's another car available. If there's no car available, she doesn't take a car, obviously. My daughter is on spring break this week, and I've spoken to her this morning, and I've taken the car keys. She will not have it back for a long time, is all I'm going to say. Not until my husband and I are able to trust her again. My husband and I will have a serious sit down with her when he gets home from work this afternoon. Wow.
Oh, teenagers. Nobody likes teenagers, and teenagers don't like being teenagers. Not a fun life stage for anybody involved here. Oh man. My first thought is like, she is definitely up to something. This is sneaky,
for sure.
This is sneaky boy behavior. This is somebody smoking weed or drinking. She's doing something shady for sure.
When she's saying it's like she's hiding, in my head I was saying, newsflash, she is. Stop being naive.
It feels that way because that's what's happening. Yeah.
It's not like she's hiding. She is hiding. That's why she's not telling you anything or responding to any calls, texts, or messages.
And even, like she's 16 and getting like really like manipulative and deregulated, and the family's like, whoa, okay, just like take the car keys. Everybody's like afraid of her like volatility, I think. Yes. Which I picked that up because that's how it was when I was 16 in my home. Everybody was like, holy shit. Oh my God. That was wild. Oh man. Gosh.
All right. We chose this one to talk about loose versus assertive boundaries. What are your initial thoughts on that piece of it, along with the wildness?
I think, part of what you're doing when you're a teenager is you start figuring out how to be like manipulative, right? And part of what's natural to do is to be independent. You're trying to push boundaries. You're trying to see what you're able to get away with. That's like a normal part of that life stage in America, at least. So what I think she's doing, right, is when moms start saying, hey, either you take this feature off or you give me your phone. That's initially the boundary, and then it comes into like, okay, we can keep it on as long as you answer the phone call. So like, and the daughter's figuring out how to give them just enough to where she's allowed to have her cake and eat it too, and mom is getting put in the position to having to keep modifying the boundaries because she's having a hard time tolerating the daughter's emotional reactions to that. And it's not like it's trying to almost like grab water, like she's figuring out ways of like kind of coming out in all these different directions, but like, you take her license and you take the car keys, if she's not going to be able to go anywhere, so she's not smarter than you, so like she's doing what is kind of appropriate to do it for that age. She's seeing what she can get away with, so I think, sometimes when teenagers, you almost have to be as firm as if they were like kids again, because if you give them a little bit, they're going to figure out how to work that loop. So like, talk about a time to be firm as a parent. This is like, they say 4 and 14, like you have to treat them kind of similar, I don't know what it is, but that's how that works. So that was my kind of thoughts. What were your first impressions of this one?
Very similarly. I know I'll preface all of this with saying, I understand parenting is a hard task, and it may seem like we're super critical of the parenting style.
Sure.
But I just think there were a lot of pitfalls in the parenting style in this particular post. And you're right. And I think this is evident of an ongoing pattern of behavior between parents and child, because yes, in their teenage years, they are going to start pushing. But what I'm seeing is just a lot of blatant disrespect. Yeah. And that's a learned behavior over time. They don't wake up at 16 and think, I'm just going to disrespect the hell out of my parents and my siblings and start stealing cars and committing felonies. They've learned that their behavior doesn't have consequences, and they just are engaging in bigger and badder behaviors, essentially. And so I think this is more evident of this ongoing lack of boundaries that this particular child, at least, has had. Maybe the older one had a similar pattern. She just had a different behavioral style. She may have been like people pleaser, perfectionist. And so she kept herself inside the boundaries versus the parents having to do it. And so now they're getting to their second born, who's not like that at all. And they're at a loss because their first kid just kind of self-governed. And their second kid is Also self-governing, just not with inside the rules that they want.
A little delinquency in her self-governance there.
Yes.
Yeah. And I might have, I think I do probably have a little bit of maybe, self-righteousness or maybe even difficulty understanding the relationship that people have with their phones now. So I got my first phone when I was 16, but it was a flip phone, right? Like
old school.
Right, it was old school. And so I got it because I started driving. My parents wanted me to have a phone. But at no point, I guess I get confused where this entitlement that it's like this thing that's needed to function. Like it's an appliance, and it's an appliance used for communication. So if the appliance is not being used to communicate, then I don't think that you need to have that anymore. And so I have a hard time kind of understanding the reservation around taking away the phone. I know there's a lot of social connection now that happens through that, but that just seems like I have a hard time kind of understanding why that feels so messy sometimes. If you're not using the phone and we can't get a hold of you, it sounds like you don't really need a phone then. And if you want to get picked up, you should be here at 3, or you're gonna have to figure out how else to get home. And to say, okay, well, she needs to have access to this thing. It's not being used how it's supposed to. So why are we dicking around with this? And again, that might be, a little self-righteous, and I don't know what it's like to raise a kid in present day. I'm sure it's super difficult to navigate all that, but I don't understand the confusion about that. Am I being a little nearsighted on that? What do you think?
No, I think there is definitely a reliance on our electronics.
Yeah.
And generations have survived without them.
Right.
I was in after school activities and my mom had to come pick me up. But I also knew what time she got off work, approximately how long it would take her, and I knew where I needed to be, or to at least be watching for her. And I did all of that without a phone.
Right, like your mom's number, so you'd go find somebody if something goes wrong. You have other ways.
Landline,
other ways of opposed to just like, if you don't text me, I'm never gonna find you. It's like, well, God, there's other ways to skin a cat, Logistics sorted out.
So I do think, and I think with parenting, there's this element of not wanting your kid to feel different.
For sure.
And so if everybody else in their class has phones, and maybe you would prefer your kid not to have a phone at that age, it is really hard to tolerate the distress your kid has of being the one kid in class without a phone.
Yeah, that's very true. And not having, it sounds like, we pick the phone up and until further notice, she's not going to get access to it. I even say, if you don't take off this feature, you're not going to have a phone for a week. Talk about screen addiction and things like that. Like when people just freak out. But I think we're not saying you can't ever have a phone, but to have so much like touchiness around picking that up, I think it shows that there's like way too intensive attachments to devices, And and there's other ways too, if we insist that she has a phone and we don't know where she's going, there's location tracking apps, right? Or it doesn't talk about that she has a job. Who's paying for gas?
Yes.
So like a lot of things too, like if you want to have a car, you have to have a job. There's a lot of other things that the parents are probably enabling, right? Where like if you create some extra kind of barriers that she's going to have to overcome, some of this might curb itself too.
Yeah. Some of this could be, I don't know if entitlement is the right word, but I'm getting a sense of entitlement. Like she feels entitled to a car, even to her sister's vehicle. And part of this could be she doesn't really understand what goes into owning and maintaining and financing a vehicle. And so I think entitlement happens a lot out of ignorance.
Oh, for sure.
And so if you made her get a job, even if she was only working, she has school activities like one day a week, and just saying, you need gas in your car, that's what you got to do, or you got to find some extra hours to pick up, she'd have a better appreciation for things. But when you're not made to work for anything, I think it's hard to appreciate it because you don't actually know the true value. Yeah.
And I think we talk about, early on that when helping hurts and people don't appreciate things that are free. So if you find that somebody's continuing to like kind of abuse these provisions that they having them have a little buy-in, I think can help, increase respect there a little bit,
Absolutely.
And it's like you don't want to, it's like every time that it sounds like every time that there's not an adult, like God knows where she goes, and it's like that can be exhausting to be a parent. If like you having like babysit like a 16-year-old to keep him in the house.
Yeah.
My parents had to get an alarm system to keep me in the house. I like to sneak out of windows. So that worked. I don't ever actually know if they turned it on, but like I tested it once and it went off. But I think there's other, supposed to being like, well, she just is out of control and we can't stop her. She knows that you think that, which is why it's happening,
Yes.
It's like, oh boy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man.
So I really got a sense of loose boundaries with this one. When we talk about loose boundaries, it's boundaries that are stated but not enforced. It can also mean boundaries that are ambiguously stated or just stated unclearly.
Yeah.
And so I get the sense these are boundaries that are maybe communicated but not enforced. And I get that because of when she talks about saying you can either take the feature off or go without your phone for a week, right? She states that one time. The daughter's response to the first attempt, she just rolls her eyes and said, that's not fair. Mom said it a second time. The daughter's second response is begging to keep her phone. She says it again a third time, saying, if you want to keep your phone, take off this feature. She refuses a third time. And this is all just on the drive home. They haven't even got home yet. Then when they get home, she sets a final boundary, at which point the daughter finally does it and then storms off to her room crying. But she also mentioned additional back and forth. So at least 4 times are documented, plus additional back and forth. So probably 5 to 6 plus times mom's having to set this boundary. And that's too much for 16. That's too much for younger kids. But I think sometimes younger kids may need more reminders. But at 16, it's take it off, do not disturb, or hand it here, and I have my hand out. That's not fair. I always think of candy. Fair comes once a year in October for the Texas State Fair. And so I'm like, life's not fair. I'm paying the bill so I can get in touch with you. I can't get in touch with you. And by you not doing this, like it's been whole 60 seconds, I'm taking that as you've decided not to do it. So give me your phone.
Yeah,
and
she
I
somehow
maybe
knew to push that. She knew that was a button to push that would make mom unsure of herself.
Yes. And I think I may be more of a strict, I'll use the word parenting style. So like with my nieces and nephews, I'm more strict. And it's like, I'm going to do it the first time and I kind of expect an immediate response. It's not 5 minutes later you decide to do it. And that time, your answer is no, you're not doing it. And I'm enforcing it.
And what do you think? Again, we're speculating. This is a little bit of what do you think is the insistence? Why is it so important to have the do not disturb on?
I'm not even sure the do not disturb is on. I think she just wants to ignore her mom. I think mom and siblings may specifically be on do not disturb because now you can go in and silence certain message threads, or at least on Apple, I'll say. And I imagine she doesn't have her friends on do not disturb, or whoever she's sneaking out to see all the time. They're not on do not disturb. They're getting through. So I think this is maybe parental specific. And I think it's to avoid being parented.
So when the child says, it's not fair that you are trying to parent me, for a parent to find that to be a fold, that's a little problematic.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's just, it's so odd to be like, you need to have your phone function as a phone. And she's like, what? This is absurd. I hate you. It's like, what? I just don't get that. That's just such a confusing thing to push back and be like, what is this thing meaning to you? Like, maybe, I don't know if she gave more context later on or whatever, but I think that's so odd. I'd be like, what is this doing for her?
I imagine for a lot of parents, you said, her response might be, I hate you. And I think for a lot of parents, that's maybe the hardest thing to hear, and the fear. Yeah. And I believe like they're probably going to hate you at some point in their childhood if you're doing a good job in setting boundaries. If your children have never said like you're the worst parent or you're so mean, chances are you're not setting any boundaries. That's a typical childlike mind that goes straight to these thought errors of that's not fair, or you're so mean, when they're not getting their way, or you're simply enforcing boundaries.
Yeah, that's so true. I remember even they said, like a group therapist, it's like you want, all your clients to like you and stuff. And then you realize like if if everybody likes you all the time, you're probably just people pleasing. You're not really
Yes.
telling people what they need to hear. You're not challenging. Right. And we worked with clients who needed to have their behaviors challenged because they were in the criminal justice system. So if everybody just likes you all the time, you're probably not really doing your job very well, you know? And I think too, this we talk about kind of like, threats versus boundaries. One of the times that we're at risk of a threat is if we're making that boundary in a heightened emotional state. And mom, she's typing that out in all caps, and she said, I started yelling. And then she goes into kind of the ultimatum, either take it off, do not disturb, or you have your phone taken away. And so I think because she probably felt a little unsure because she realized she was setting this during a state of passion.
Yeah.
But then she let her daughter talk her out of it 4 times on the ride home. So if like you're going to set a boundary, you can, if it's too rigid of a boundary, you can adjust that later, but don't be adjusting that real time as somebody's talking you out of that boundary. Say, hey, this is what I said. Me and your dad will talk about this tonight. And if we need to make revisions, we'll circle back. But like that, follow through with that first one. Don't let the teenager start poking holes in that. Even if you're worried that it is not unfair or not a good limit to set, do that behind closed doors later.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. And when we were doing kind of our prep, we got into kind of, difference between boundaries and discipline. Did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes. We had a very philosophical question and conversation about really what's the difference between a boundary and discipline. And we went back and forth before we ultimately just looked up textbook definitions for these. So I'm just going to give you guys what we came up with. So boundary is defined as a psychological demarcation that protects the integrity of either an individual or group, or that helps an individual or group set realistic limits on participation in relationships or activities. We're comparing this to discipline, which is defined as the practice of training people to obey rules or a code of behavior using punishment to correct disobedience. And so after much discussion, we kind of talked about boundaries being more about your interaction with other people, this being kind of a consensual relationship in which we're setting boundaries. Whereas with discipline, we're looking at really molding somebody to behave in a very specific way. So I think kids is maybe a good example to think about discipline. Parents use the concept of discipline to mold them into current societal expectations, which may also then be influenced by personal values or religious values or anything else to kind of create this overall conduct of behavior.
Yeah. And I like, boundary is kind of, I like the word limits, right? And more about expectations, where discipline is to obey.
Yes.
So we're talking about discipline is not an appropriate element between adult relationships. If you are trying to discipline your partner or have your friends obey you, that is problematic. So boundary is relationships as adults. Where discipline, there's a power differential, right? So in this situation, mom is implementing discipline because there's a punishment that comes out where we do not discipline adults. And this isn't really a point of boundary setting so much. It's not saying, hey, just for clarifying, this is the demarcation in the sand and this is not okay. And this is what I'm going to do. It's being like, if you don't do what I say, you're going to get punished. And that's a big difference there too. But
I think we talked a little bit more about within that realm of discipline, attempting to control the other person's behavior, which we talk a lot about on here. That is definitely not the goal. And so discipline is to control the other person, and we're doing that through the use of punishment. And there's a goal of how we want them to interact, not just with us, but with other people, whereas boundaries is very self-specific, and it's how they're interacting with us. and we're not controlling what they do, they can continue to do that. We're controlling what we're going to do in response. We're just not going to engage with that.
Yeah. So what do you think in a do-over, what are maybe some other ways that parents can set some limits around the phone? Or what do you think is appropriate there?
I think kind of laying down the law with it, as far as if I said this, take this feature off or hand it over for a week and they didn't, I'm not going to then get into this power struggle with you. If you don't want to hand over your phone, don't hand it over. I'll do the next thing on what's in my control. I'm going to go home and I'm changing the Wi-Fi password. Your Wi-Fi is not going to work. Then I'm calling the phone company and I'm shutting off the line. I don't care how much it's going to cost me to do.
Yeah, if you like continue to disobey, then this is going to be a privilege that you no longer have access to entirely.
Yeah, but I'm not going to do a back and forth. That's just not my personality.
Okay.
What would you do?
I might tackle a child for their phone. I like your option. I mean, yeah, I think that is probably a good way. If this is the consequence and this is the punishment, and you're saying that you're not going to submit to that punishment, then I'm going to escalate this to where like you don't get to use that at all now. I first said a week. You chose to disrespect that, and now this is like escalated because of the decisions that you've made. You know, and I would put some parameters of this is what you would need to do to earn it back. You know, this is what we need to see or whatever. But again, I think in the moment, shutting it down, setting that hard limit, and then you guys can circle back later once emotions aren't high. But it's like during that time to get into a power struggle or be talked out of it. That's not a good time. Yeah. Go into your first gut, and then you can revisit later. But yeah, I feel again, it's like an appliance. So like, I don't have a hard time if you're not using it, you don't get to have it. I wouldn't. Yeah, maybe struggle with that one too much. What's too? I mean, I would almost be like, if I think there's other ways if the kid's going to insist on having their phone. I think as a parent, when there's that level of sneakiness, I think that's when you're allowed to invade some privacy there. So like, I think those parents need to figure out what is going on with that phone. Where's this kid going? So I think, submitting to some kind of, they have apps where like parents can see text messages you receive them. I think maybe, and kids can find workaround, but even having like location, stuff like that too, that would definitely be a contingency. Not only you're not going to have this for a week, but when you get this back, we're also going to have all these things. And if you take it off, you won't have a phone at all. I'll give them a little burner phone.
Get her phone with those.
Yeah. At 16, you'd want to have that in there. I think, getting like a little burner phone, if for a week you're able to answer my phone calls and respond to me in a timely way on this little burner phone, then we could talk about you earning your smartphone back, but having like patterns like that too, I think would be helpful. But
she must just needs like an old school pager. Like, I'll page you when I'm outside. You don't actually need to respond. I just expect you to walk outside.
Yeah. Or like if you're not going to get to do after school stuff anymore, or something.
Yeah.
And you want to keep kids busy, right? So like you have to, if you need know where your kid is, having your kid have to be in more places can be helpful too, because if they're not using their time wisely and not respecting people's stuff, then they can go figure that out a hard way too.
Yeah.
Like I know that was helpful to me.
Yeah. Maybe taking more control. And if they can't act like a mature 16-year-old and they're acting like a 5-year-old, well, I'm going to treat you like the 5-year-old. I wouldn't wait for my 5-year-old to come outside from practice. I'm going to park the car and walk inside and get my 5-year-old. Yeah. And what is that going to look like? That you're 16 and you need your mommy to walk inside and walk you to the car because you go MIA after practice.
Yeah, because they're so socially kind of obsessed at that age. So even kind of leveraging that in a positive way of like, shame's an appropriate emotion when something embarrassing happens. And we're going to use that to our benefit to get you to stop acting like a spoiled brat a little bit. Yeah, she's doing something sneaky for sure. What about the car? And she's not even just respecting her parents. That's also her sister. There's a lot of people she's bulldozing here.
I would set the rules, and this might be a bit dramatic.
Okay.
But I think I will report the car as stolen if I couldn't get in touch with you and confirm that you had the car. If I come home, none of your siblings saw you drive off in the car. None of your siblings knew where you were at. You didn't communicate to them. I'm calling you and you're not answering my phone. I have no guarantee that you have my car. I have an educated guess, but I don't know. So I'm probably going to ask them put a an alert out for the car. I might ask them to go ahead and just take you in. And let's just sit there for a couple of hours. And I'm like, God, I bet your afternoon really sucked, didn't it? But I knew where you were, so I was feeling pretty
relaxed.
at ease.
Yeah, I know. I'm always like, the legal system can be a really helpful reinforcement. I was
that
thinking
might be kind of a Karen move, but
I think they even have like, some kind of low jack shit where if like you miss your car payment, they can shut your car off.
Yep.
And you wouldn't,
like rental cars have them.
Rental cars, where they have like location trackers and things like that too. And obviously, you wouldn't want to do it while that car's moving, but almost like bugging your own car or saying like, you can take the car, but I don't know how you're going to get back home because it's going to be shut off. So, and I know where it is, so I'm going to be able to come find you. So I really hope you're not at that boy's house or whatever, but I think that she's using the car as being like really opportunistic. And I think she probably is getting so frantic because she's out there doing things that she shouldn't be doing and is trying to get that done in a time before somebody comes home to find her, Oh God. And I think, more eyes gives you more data, but I think being careful too to not ask the other children to parent, and again, her older sister is 22 or something like that. So she's much older. Yeah. But I think, don't ask the other siblings of like, hey, keep your eyes out, or kind of making like this little snitch culture among the siblings too. Probably avoid that as well. I get there has to be eyes on it. Like if it's safety, I think there's a softness to that, but yeah, I mean, I think taking the license, taking the keys, not providing gas money or, any other kind of like logistical support, if that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Or you can only take a car if somebody else is with you. You don't get to drive it, Was there anything else that they could I think like hiding the cars, like not parking them at the house or something, that would probably be a little extreme, but like if there's other
even
ways
like hiding keys, I feel like is extreme and it's enabling the behavior instead of stopping it. We're changing like what we do with our belongings because you can't respect us. And I think there needs to be more consequence for the 16-year-old versus parents and the 22-year-old having to hide their keys.
What would you think? Like, and at 16, you do kind of have that awareness of like parental control is kind of a concept. If I choose to not respect the authority that you possess, what are you going to do besides like physically restraining or something like that? What do you think would be kind of other disciplines that could happen at 16?
She's in activities, so as much as maybe she needs those, or she's relying maybe on sports scholarships or whatever. But I would be taking her out of those, or maybe I'd be talking to her coach and saying, I don't think she's really exemplifying the values of your team. And I think she needs to be benched. Yeah. I think allowing her to continue to play is not helpful.
Yeah.
Her coming to practice gives her some structure, keeps her out of trouble. I'd like her to come to practice, but it would be really helpful if you could support us in this and bench her.
That's a good idea. Like you have to figure out like what they care about.
Yes.
Take it from them, get kind of creative, Yeah.
I liked your parents where they were having you do chores and shit around the house. And I think if we're saying you need to like earn some gas money, do things like that, I'm going to start setting dollar values for all of these things.
That's kind of also, I was thinking like, if you have so much time on your hands, I guess you don't need me to cook you food anymore, huh? You got all this time to cook. Like you're about to figure out how to cook. And now, you have to care for your child and there's like limits to that, but I think even if somebody wants to go act like a grown person and not respect parents, and they don't get to have access to some of the parental comforts too, of like caretaking in that way.
This one might be a bit old school, but I was also thinking, let's take the door off of her room. She respects privacy. She can change in the bathroom. She has a younger brother, so there's some privacy issues there, but you can change clothes in the bathroom. Other than that, like you obviously value privacy and secrecy, so no door.
No bedroom door. I was thinking that too, of that, like if she wants to be sneaky and she's hiding stuff, And I think, this she obviously has kind of her own second life that her parents aren't aware of. I think, counseling or even talking to maybe
say that too.
School people, like school therapists, of like, she's got some behavior problems going on. We need backup. She is not respecting us, and just having even extra like adults' eyes on her as well. Yeah.
I imagine she would, especially at this age when she cares so much about her friends in her life, I think she would hopefully start to respect boundaries quickly. And I think the biggest thing that needs to happen is parents need to set them and enforce them. And I think that's the biggest issue. They're not doing anything.
Yeah, and having that really clear feedback loop, right? Because at 16 they can choose what they do, right? They're growing in their ability of consequential thinking, and they could, so saying, if you do this, this is going to happen. And I think just like, because it's kind of like, you talk about the victim thing of somebody setting a boundary, and then that's not fair. It's kind of like, you knew what was going to happen when you chose to disrespect me. So like, I'm not going to protect you from your sadness that you're feeling because you broke a rule, and just like letting them tolerate that distress and just being really clear and concise in that punishment feedback loop.
Yeah. And again, boundary setting and boundary enforcing with your children is simply preparing them to be an adult. If they work at any job where they have a boss, there are rules and boundary enforcements. They can't be stealing their coworker's shit and expect to keep their job.
Right.
That's not going to happen. They can't disappear for hours and expect to keep their job. And so part of parenting is preparing your child for the real world and to live life without you.
Yeah, and to realize that consequences happen.
Yeah, so they have to be able to feel some of that, and that you do it within the protected space of the home and the parent-child relationship, so they can understand that parallel. We use the word transferable skill. They start to build these transferable skills of understanding actions and consequences, and they can apply that at school. They can apply that at work. They can apply that in romantic relationships. So it's your job as a parent to raise them to be these healthy, functioning, hopefully kind, considerate adults. And part of that means you have to teach them actions and consequences. And that can feel uncomfortable as a parent. That's part of the job.
And they have to develop that distress tolerance for that, right? Because when they have consequences happen in the real world, they need to be able to own up to that and do something different, as opposed to have like a total meltdown and blame the other person for holding them accountable.
Yes.
Yeah. What about that? How would you deal with the kind of MIA behavior of her sneakiness, and she's saying it's none of your business, like just overtly just withholding information? She's not even like coming up with like fake stories. It's like, God.
Yeah. As a parent, I think I'd have to go to tracking devices, as much of an added expense that may be to like put trackers on cars. Tracking electronics would be a lot easier, but if she didn't have her phone, chances are she probably wouldn't be making plans to go places. But
yeah. And she, I think that there's something unsafe is happening. I don't know, because you might need to add extra measures of, contraceptive or even like safe sex limits that need to be. Yeah, you might need to be doing things of like, you're going to get drug tested. I mean, we don't really know what's going on here, of what other things are like going on. But I think, even keeping her busy, so again, you can require her to get a job. She is 16. If she does well with school, have her be super duper busy. She just didn't have time to get in trouble. You can get alarm systems in the house. That did work. I don't want, if they ever listen to this, you guys did a good job. That was clever. That did work. But yeah, I think that's I think that is disrespectful. But I think there's also like, there's some safety concerns going on there. That's really important to get a handle on that. Saying like, it's not your business. If I ask my kid where they're going, it's not my business. I'd be like, you got me fucked up. Like, what? You are exactly my business. I'm the person who most needs to know that. Yeah. So I think even like kind of what the pushback conversations look like, and even having limits on like how you're going to be spoken to about the MIA behavior would be important too.
Yeah.
So who's the asshole here, you think?
No, many. The 16-year-old daughter, for sure, an asshole. She was trained by her parents, by not having boundaries, to be an asshole and to treat others poorly. And that makes them assholes. Raising an asshole makes you an asshole, unfortunately. You need to set some boundaries and stop being so passive in your parenting.
Yeah.
Do your job.
Do your job. Yeah.
22-year-old sister, I would say maybe even a bit of an asshole for enabling. And not being like, no, those are my keys. Like, give them back.
Yeah, about to tackle you and snatch that back, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I think the backtracking and letting the child participate in what the consequences are, I don't think that that's appropriate to do. And yeah, I think mom needs to have some more distress tolerance for being firm.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and then the daughter, the 16-year-old, she's obviously a huge asshole. She has a disregard for other people. She's very selfish. But most teenagers are pretty big assholes. But I think this kid needs to get some counseling, and I think even family therapy might not be a bad idea.
Yeah, it's interesting. Mom was asking about being a asshole. She was saying, I think I was too harsh, but I was at my wit's end. Am I the asshole? And we are saying you're the asshole, but you're not the asshole for setting a boundary with your kid. You're an asshole because you've let it get this far.
Yeah, and even when she's yelling, that stuff that's in all caps, none of us are able to get a hold of you. That's something that normally takes 2 minutes, can take 20 or more because we can't get you to answer your phone. Your father and I have been worried sick whenever you don't answer. She's yelling, right, which is aggressive.
Yes.
And she did started, she got mad and her voice got big. And also she's not engaging in unfair fighting aside from yelling, right? She's not name calling. She's expressing like, I am worried and I'm scared and I'm frustrated, and she's sharing that. So I don't think, I think if somebody continues to disrespect you over and over, anger is appropriate.
Yes.
So I don't think that she's an asshole for getting angry like that either.
No.
But yeah, she did, I think, make a discipline in that angry space, which showed to not be very effective because she backtracked. But.
Yep.
So what are our summary points here?
Loose boundaries happen when the boundaries we're setting are unclear or ambiguous, or they happen when we are setting the boundary but not enforcing them, as was happening in this particular post. Difference between boundaries and discipline tend to boil down to control. Whereas discipline, you are attempting to control the other person's behavior. Boundaries, you definitely are not. You're controlling how you interact with that person. Discipline is not okay between the same power dynamic. So if you're in a relationship like significant other, there should not be discipline in that relationship dynamic. And it's typically in power differential relationship dynamics. Mm-hmm. Your job as a parent is to help your kids feel consequences of their behavior in a safe and healing environment. And if you are uncomfortable with that distress, you need to get some skills for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, don't raise assholes.
And the teenage stage won't last for forever.
Yes.
You can get through it. Yeah.
Alrighty. That's what we have for you guys today. As always, we would love to hear your thoughts. Send them to assertivepodcast@gmail.com. Until next time.